The steam engine's whistle cut through the dry New Mexico air like a knife, and Caroline Crawford felt her stomach twist into knots as the train lurched to a stop at Lordsburg's modest depot. She pressed her gloved hands against her travel-worn dress, feeling the shame burn in her cheeks as she caught sight of her reflection in the window glass. The fading bruise along her jaw still visible, despite the powder she had carefully applied that morning. She was not the pristine bride the cowboy had surely been expecting when he placed that advertisement in the Boston newspaper 6 months ago. Not after everything that had happened in the weeks leading up to her departure. Not after she had spent her last dollar on this train ticket west to escape a scandal that would have destroyed what remained of her family's reputation. The conductor offered his hand to help her down the metal steps, and Caroline accepted it with trembling fingers, her worn boots touching the sun-baked platform of Lordsburg, New Mexico territory, in the year 1878. The town sprawled before her in shades of brown and dusty red, false-fronted buildings lining a wide dirt street where horses stood tied to hitching posts, and men in broad-brimmed hats went about their business under the relentless August sun. She clutched her single carpetbag tighter, everything she owned in the world compressed into one threadbare piece of luggage, and searched the small crowd gathered at the station for the man whose letters had promised her a fresh start, a new life, a chance at redemption she did not deserve. Warren Pierce stood at the edge of the platform, his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched the passengers disembark. He had read Caroline's letters so many times the paper had grown soft at the creases, memorizing every carefully penned word, every small detail she had shared about her life back east. The photograph she had sent showed a pretty woman with dark hair and serious eyes, but Warren had learned long ago that photographs could lie or flatter, or simply fail to capture the truth of a person. What mattered to him was the kindness in her words, the intelligence in her observations, the quiet courage it must have taken for a woman alone to answer his advertisement and agree to marry a stranger 2,000 miles away. When he saw her step onto the platform, Warren knew her immediately despite the fact that she looked different from her photograph, thinner perhaps, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard traveling. But it was the way she held herself that caught his attention, the way she seemed to be trying to disappear into herself, her shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow, her gaze fixed on the ground rather than meeting the eyes of anyone around her. Warren had seen that posture before in horses that had been broken too harshly, in men who had endured too much cruelty, and something fierce and protective surged up in his chest. He stepped forward, removing his hat as he approached, his boots loud on the wooden planks. Caroline looked up at the sound, and when their eyes met, Warren saw fear flash across her face, followed immediately by resignation. She thought he would reject her, he realized with sudden clarity. She thought he would take one look at her and turn away, leaving her stranded in this unfamiliar place with no money and no prospects and nowhere else to go. Instead, Warren did something he had not planned, something that came from pure instinct rather than thought. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides and reached for her hand, not grabbing or demanding but offering, his calloused palm turned upward in invitation. When Caroline hesitantly placed her fingers in his, Warren wrapped his other hand around hers as well, holding her hand between both of his with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his sun-weathered face and work-roughened appearance. "Miss Crawford," he said, his voice low and warm, pitched for her ears alone despite the people milling around them. "I am Warren Pierce, and I cannot tell you how glad I am that you are here." Caroline's eyes widened, and Warren saw tears begin to gather at the corners, threatening to spill over onto her cheeks. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, clearly struggling with emotions too powerful for words. The fading bruise on her jaw caught the sunlight, and Warren felt his own jaw tighten, but he kept his expression calm, his hold on her hand steady and sure. "I know the journey must have been hard," Warren continued, still holding her hand as if it were something precious and fragile. "I know you must be tired and hungry and probably wondering what kind of place you have come to. But I want you to know that you are safe here, Caroline. You are safe with me, and I will spend every day of my life making sure you never have cause to doubt that." The tears spilled over then, tracking clean lines through the dust on Caroline's face, and she made a small sound that was half laugh and half sob. "You do not even know me," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying or dust or both. "You do not know what I have done, what happened before I came here. You might not want me if you knew." Warren squeezed her hand gently, then released one of his to gesture toward a wagon waiting nearby, a sturdy vehicle pulled by a pair of patient bay horses. "How about we get you out of this sun first?" he suggested. "We can talk on the way to the ranch, and you can tell me as much or as little as you want. But Caroline, I need you to understand something right now before we go any further. I did not ask for a perfect woman. I asked for a brave one, and any woman who would travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger is braver than most men I know." Caroline let out a shaky breath and nodded, allowing Warren to guide her toward the wagon. He helped her up onto the seat with the same careful courtesy, making sure she was settled before retrieving her carpet bag from where she had set it down. The bag was so light it might have been empty, and Warren felt another surge of protectiveness, understanding that this woman had left behind everything familiar, everyone she knew, to start over in a place she had only read about in letters. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to set the horses in motion. The wagon rolled away from the depot and down Lordsburg's Main Street, past the general store and the saloon, past the church with its white painted steeple, and the schoolhouse where children's voices drifted through open windows. Caroline watched it all with wide eyes, taking in the unfamiliar landscape, the harsh beauty of the desert territory that would now be her home. They left the town behind, heading south and west into open country where the land stretched endless and brown toward distant purple mountains. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but Warren could sense Caroline gathering her courage, preparing to tell him whatever it was that weighed so heavily on her conscience. "I was engaged before," Caroline said finally, her voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of hooves. "Back in Boston. His name was Thomas, and our families had known each other for years. Everyone expected us to marry." Warren kept his eyes on the road ahead, giving her the space to speak without the pressure of his direct gaze. "What happened?" Caroline twisted her hands in her lap, worrying at the worn fabric of her gloves. "He changed after the engagement was announced. Or maybe he was always that way and I just had not seen it before. He became controlling, demanding. He wanted to know where I was every moment, who I spoke to, what I was thinking. And when I did not answer quickly enough or in the way he wanted, he would get angry." Warren's hands tightened on the reins, but he forced himself to remain calm, to listen. Caroline needed to tell this story, needed someone to hear it, and he would not interrupt with his own anger at a man he had never met. "One night there was a party at his parents' house," Caroline continued, her voice growing steadier as she spoke, as if telling the truth was lifting a weight from her shoulders. "I was talking to one of his cousins, just polite conversation about nothing important. Thomas saw us and became furious. He accused me of flirting, of trying to embarrass him. When I denied it, He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. His cousin tried to intervene, and Thomas hit him, just struck him across the face in front of everyone. "And that is when you left him," Warren said quietly. Caroline shook her head, and Warren heard shame in her silence. "No, that is when his family convinced everyone that his cousin had been drunk and belligerent, that Thomas had only been defending himself. That is when my own family told me that all men had tempers, and I needed to be more careful about provoking him. That is when I realized no one was going to help me, that if I married Thomas, I would be alone with him and his anger for the rest of my life." "So you answered my advertisement," Warren said, understanding now the desperate courage it must have taken. "I stole money from my father's desk," Caroline admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Enough for the train ticket and a little extra. I left a note saying I was sorry but I could not marry Thomas, and I got on the first train heading west. By the time they realized I was gone, I was already in Pennsylvania. Thomas came after me anyway." Warren's attention sharpened. "He found you." Caroline nodded, one hand unconsciously touching the bruise on her jaw. "In Chicago, I had to change trains and somehow he tracked me there. He was waiting at the station. He said if I did not come back with him, he would make sure my family was ruined, that everyone would know what I had done. When I refused, he struck me. A policeman saw it happen and intervened, held Thomas while I got back on the train. I do not know what happened after that. I just know I kept moving west until I got here." The wagon rolled on through the desert landscape, and Warren let the silence stretch while he processed everything Caroline had told him. She was watching him now. He could feel her gaze on the side of his face, waiting for his judgment, his rejection, his disgust at what she had done. Instead, Warren pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious in his tanned face. "Caroline Crawford, you are one of the bravest people I have ever met," he said firmly. "You recognized danger and you escaped it, even when everyone around you said you were wrong. You protected yourself when no one else would. There is no shame in that. There is only courage." Fresh tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks, but these were different from the ones before, cleaner somehow, as if Warren's words had washed away some of the guilt she had been carrying. "You still want to marry me?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Even knowing I am a thief and a scandal and that Thomas might still be looking for me." Warren reached over and gently took her hand again, the gesture already becoming familiar between them. "I want to marry you even more now than I did before," he said honestly. "Because now I know exactly how strong you are, and strength is something I value above all else out here. As for Thomas, if he is foolish enough to come to New Mexico territory looking for you, he will discover that things are different here. You are under my protection now, and I do not take that lightly." Caroline searched his face as if looking for signs of deception or hidden anger, but she must have found only sincerity because she nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around his. "I will try to be a good wife to you," she promised. "I will work hard and learn whatever I need to know. I will not be a burden." "You will be my partner," Warren corrected gently. "That is what I need, Caroline, not a servant or a decoration, but a true partner who can stand beside me and help build something lasting. Can you do that?" For the first time since stepping off the train, Caroline smiled, and Warren felt his heart lift at the sight of it, at the way it transformed her entire face. "Yes," she said simply. "I can do that." Warren smiled back and released her hand, taking up the reins again to set the horses moving. They traveled in companionable silence for another hour, the desert landscape gradually shifting as they climbed into slightly higher country, where scrub grass fought for survival and twisted juniper trees clung to rocky soil. Eventually, A cluster of buildings appeared in the distance, and Warren pointed them out with obvious pride. "That is the ranch," he said. "It is not much yet, but it is mine, bought and paid for with money I saved working cattle drives and breaking horses. The house needs work, and the barn could use a new roof, but the well is good and the grazing is decent for this part of the territory." As they drew closer, Caroline could see that Warren's assessment had been modest. The ranch was small but well maintained, with a sturdy adobe house that looked like it would stay cool even in the brutal summer heat, a barn that might need a new roof but was otherwise sound, and a series of corrals where several horses watched their approach with pricked ears. A vegetable garden struggled against the dry climate near the house, and chickens scratched in the dirt near a small coop. Warren pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, coming around to help Caroline descend. His hand settled on her waist, strong and sure, and he lifted her down as easily as if she weighed nothing. For a moment, they stood close together, and Caroline could smell the clean scent of soap and sun-warmed cotton, could see the flecks of gold in Warren's blue eyes. "Welcome home, Caroline," Warren said softly, and Caroline felt something warm and fragile unfold in her chest, something that might have been hope. The inside of the house was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and a packed earth floor covered in woven rugs. The main room held a large fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and a pair of comfortable-looking armchairs. A doorway led to what Caroline assumed was a bedroom, and another smaller door probably opened onto a pantry or storage area. "I know it is not what you are accustomed to," Warren began, but Caroline cut him off with a shake of her head. "It is perfect," she said, and meant it. This house was hers, a place where no one would tell her she was wrong or foolish or too sensitive. A place where she could start over, become someone new, build a life based on her own choices rather than others' expectations. Warren showed her around, pointing out where things were kept, explaining the routines of the ranch. He had been managing alone for the past year, since his hired hand had moved on to prospect for silver, doing all the work himself from sunrise to well past sunset. Caroline could see the evidence of his labor in his calloused hands, in the lean muscle of his frame, in the quiet competence with which he moved through his daily tasks. "There is fresh water in the pitcher," Warren said, gesturing to a washstand in the bedroom. "You should rest, clean up from your journey. I need to see to the horses and check on the cattle, but I will be back before sunset. We can have supper together, and tomorrow we can go into town to see the minister about getting married, if that is still what you want." Caroline nodded, suddenly shy now that they were alone in the house together, now that the reality of what she had agreed to was settling over her. Warren seemed to sense her nervousness because he gave her a reassuring smile and headed for the door, pausing on the threshold to look back at her. "I am glad you are here, Caroline," he said again, and then he was gone, leaving her alone in the quiet house. Caroline stood still for a long moment, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this new place. The chickens clucking outside, the wind whistling through gaps in the window frame, the distant sound of Warren's voice as he spoke to the horses. Then she set her carpetbag on the bedroom floor and went to the washstand, pouring cool water into the basin and splashing it on her face, washing away the dust and grime of 2 weeks' travel. The bedroom was sparse but comfortable, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. A window looked out over the desert, offering a view of the mountains in the distance, their peaks still holding a trace of snow even in August. Caroline unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses on the pegs, tucking her few personal items into the dresser drawers. It took less than 10 minutes to settle in, and then she was left with nothing to do but think. She wandered back into the main room and examined it more closely, noting the small details that revealed Warren's character. The books on a shelf near the fireplace, their spines worn from reading. The carefully mended curtains at the windows. The wildflowers in a jar on the table, clearly picked fresh that morning in anticipation of her arrival. This was a man who valued beauty and learning, who took care with the small things, who had thought about her arrival and tried to make the house welcoming. Caroline found herself at the stove, examining the cast iron cookware, the supplies in the pantry. Warren had laid in extra provisions, she noticed: flour and sugar, coffee and tea, dried beans and salt pork, even a precious jar of honey. She could make supper, she decided. It would give her something useful to do, a way to begin earning her place here. She built up the fire in the stove, working from memory of watching the cook back in Boston, and set about making biscuits and beans, simple fare but filling. As she worked, she found herself relaxing, the familiar motions of cooking soothing her frayed nerves. This she could do. This she knew how to manage. Warren returned as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. He paused in the doorway, surprise crossing his face at the sight of the table set for two, the smell of food cooking, Caroline stirring a pot at the stove. "You did not have to do this," he said, but his tone was pleased. "I wanted to," Caroline replied, ladling beans onto 2 plates. "I wanted to contribute something." They sat down to eat together, and if the meal was simple, it was also comfortable, the silence between them easy rather than strained. Warren asked about her journey, and Caroline found herself telling him about the things she had seen from the train window: the vast prairies and the great rivers, the small towns and the endless sky. He told her about the ranch, about his plans for the future, about the challenges of raising cattle in this harsh climate. "I am not a rich man," Warren said honestly as they finished their meal. "This life is hard, and there will be times when money is tight and the work seems endless. But I own this land free and clear, and every year I manage to set aside a little more, build a little more. In time, I hope to have one of the finest ranches in this part of the territory." "I am not afraid of hard work," Caroline assured him, "and I do not need riches. I just need honesty and kindness, and I think you have both of those in abundance." Warren's expression softened, and he reached across the table to take her hand once more. "We will go into town tomorrow and speak to Reverend Matthews. He is a good man, understanding. He will not ask questions we do not want to answer. And then, if you are still willing, we will be married." Caroline nodded, her heart beginning to race at the reality of it. Tomorrow she would marry this man she had only just met, would pledge her life to his, would become Caroline Pierce instead of Caroline Crawford. It should have terrified her, but instead, she felt only a strange sense of rightness, as if all the painful steps that had brought her to this moment had been leading somewhere worthwhile after all. That night, Warren insisted that Caroline take the bedroom while he made up a bedroll near the fireplace. Caroline protested that it was his house, his bed, but Warren was firm. "You are my guest until we are married," he said simply. "And even after, we will take things at whatever pace makes you comfortable. I did not bring you here to force myself on you, Caroline. I brought you here to build a life together, and that requires trust and respect on both sides." Caroline retreated to the bedroom, closing the door behind her and leaning against it, her eyes closed. She had never known a man like Warren Pierce, had never imagined that such men existed outside of books. His kindness was not weakness, she sensed that clearly. He was strong and capable, the kind of man who could protect what was his. But he chose to use that strength gently, to offer rather than demand, to protect rather than control. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into the big bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Through the closed door, she could hear Warren moving around the main room, banking the fire, checking the locks on the doors and windows. The sounds were comforting rather than frightening, the sounds of someone taking care of things, watching over her safety. For the first time in months, Caroline fell asleep without fear. Morning came early on the ranch, announced by roosters and the sound of Warren moving quietly around the main room, trying not to wake her. Caroline rose and dressed quickly, emerging from the bedroom to find Warren at the stove, cooking eggs and bacon. "Good morning," he said, looking slightly embarrassed to be caught at domestic tasks. "I thought I would let you sleep a bit longer, but I suppose I was not as quiet as I intended." "I am accustomed to rising early," Caroline assured him, coming to help with the meal. They worked together in the small kitchen space, and Caroline marveled at how natural it felt, how easily they moved around each other despite their newness to one another. After breakfast, Warren hitched the horses to the wagon once more, and they set out for Lordsburg. The morning air was already warm, promising another scorching day, but Caroline found she did not mind the heat as much as she had expected. There was something clean about it, something honest, so different from the humid summers in Boston. The town was more active than it had been the previous afternoon, with people going about their business, calling greetings to one another, stopping to chat in the street. Warren guided the wagon to the church, a simple white building with a cross mounted above the door. Reverend Matthews was working in a small garden beside the church, his shirt sleeves rolled up and dirt on his hands. "Warren Pierce," the Reverend called out cheerfully, straightening up and wiping his hands on a rag. "Good to see you in town on a weekday. What brings you by?" "Reverend Matthews, I would like you to meet Miss Caroline Crawford," Warren said, helping Caroline down from the wagon. "She arrived yesterday from Boston, and we are hoping you might be available to marry us." The Reverend's eyebrows rose, but his expression remained welcoming as he shook Caroline's hand. "Boston is a long way to come," he observed gently. "You are a mail-order bride, Miss Crawford." Caroline lifted her chin, refusing to show shame even though she felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Yes, Reverend. Warren and I have been corresponding for several months. I know it must seem sudden, but I assure you I am here of my own free will and desire." Reverend Matthews studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Warren is a good man, one of the finest I know. If he chose you, then I am certain you are a woman of quality. When would you like the ceremony to take place?" "Today, if possible," Warren said. "I know it is short notice, but we saw no reason to wait." The Reverend chuckled and gestured toward the church. "Well, let us go inside and make it official then. Though I should warn you, church weddings around here are not the formal affairs you might be used to back east, Miss Crawford. We keep things simple in the territory." "Simple suits me perfectly," Caroline said with feeling. They followed Reverend Matthews into the church, a cool, dim space with wooden pews and a simple altar. The Reverend asked them to wait while he fetched his wife to serve as a witness, and he returned a few minutes later with a pleasant-faced woman who introduced herself as Martha Matthews. "How wonderful!" Martha exclaimed, embracing Caroline warmly despite having just met her. "We have been telling Warren for months that he needed a wife. This ranch of his will never be a proper home without a woman's touch." The ceremony itself was brief and straightforward, with no music or flowers or elaborate vows. Reverend Matthews asked if they came freely and willingly to the marriage, if they promised to honor and cherish each other, to remain faithful through whatever trials life might bring. Warren's voice was steady and sure as he made his promises, his hand warm and solid as it held Caroline's. When it was Caroline's turn, she found her voice wavering slightly with emotion. "I do," she said, looking up into Warren's eyes, seeing only kindness and strength there. "I promise to be a true and faithful wife, to work beside you and support you, to build a life together that honors both of us." Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, and Warren bent to kiss Caroline, a gentle press of lips that lasted only a moment but left Caroline breathless. Martha Matthews clapped her hands together in delight, and Reverend Matthews shook Warren's hand with obvious pleasure. "Congratulations to you both," the Reverend said warmly. "Warren, you bring your wife by for Sunday services when you can. We would love to have her become part of our community." They signed the marriage certificate, and Warren paid the Reverend for his services, adding a little extra for the church fund. Martha insisted on giving Caroline a basket of fresh bread and preserves as a wedding gift, refusing to accept any payment. "You just come visit me when you get lonely out at that ranch," Martha said, squeezing Caroline's hands. "It can be isolating for a woman used to city life. You will need friends, and I would be honored to be one of them." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you so much." Warren helped his wife into the wagon, the word echoing strangely in his mind. His wife. He had a wife now, this brave, beautiful woman who had traveled so far to start over, who had chosen him sight unseen based on nothing but letters and hope. The responsibility of it settled over him like a mantle, not heavy but significant. She was his to protect now, his to care for, his to cherish. "Should we stop at the general store?" Caroline asked as they drove back through town. "I noticed you are running low on some supplies and I could get fabric for curtains, perhaps some things for the house." Warren considered, then nodded. "That is a fine idea. I will introduce you to Sam Patterson, who runs the store. He is a bit gruff, but his prices are fair and his goods are quality." The general store was a treasure trove of goods, everything from farming implements to bolts of cloth, from foodstuffs to medicines. Sam Patterson turned out to be a heavy-set man with shrewd eyes and a booming voice, but he greeted Caroline with unexpected courtesy when Warren introduced her as his wife. "Well now, Warren Pierce finally got himself married," Sam declared. "About time, too. This pretty lady is too good for you by half, but maybe she will civilize you a bit." Caroline found herself laughing, charmed despite herself by Sam's rough humor. She selected fabric for new curtains, thread for mending, seeds for the garden, and various household items that would make the ranch house more comfortable. Warren added practical supplies to the order: flour and sugar, coffee and salt, ammunition and lamp oil. The total came to more than Caroline had expected, and she worried that Warren was spending too much. But he paid without hesitation, clearly pleased to be outfitting his home properly. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, a man approached from across the street, his bearing and clothing marking him as someone of authority. Warren's expression became guarded, and he positioned himself slightly between Caroline and the stranger. "That is Sheriff Cole," Warren said quietly to Caroline. "He is decent enough, but territorial law can be complicated." Sheriff Cole tipped his hat to Caroline and offered his hand to Warren. "Heard you got married this morning," the sheriff said without preamble. "Wanted to come by and offer my congratulations, and also to make sure everything is on the up and up." Warren's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "This is my wife, Caroline. We were married by Reverend Matthews not 2 hours ago. Everything is legal and proper." The sheriff studied Caroline with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. "Madam, I need to ask you directly. Are you here of your own free will? Has this man or anyone else forced or coerced you into this marriage?" Caroline met the sheriff's gaze squarely, appreciating that he cared enough to ask even as she resented the implication. "I am here entirely of my own choice, Sheriff. Warren has been nothing but kind and respectful toward me. I answered his advertisement freely, came west freely, and married him freely." Sheriff Cole nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good enough for me. Welcome to Lordsburg, Mrs. Pierce. If you ever need anything, my office is just down the street." He tipped his hat again and walked away, and Warren let out a breath he had been holding. "I apologize for that," he said to Caroline. "The sheriff has had to deal with some unsavory situations in the past. He was just doing his job." "I understand," Caroline said, and she did. In fact, she found it reassuring that the law here seemed to care about protecting women, even if the concern came a bit late for her personally. They headed back to the ranch, the wagon now loaded with supplies and the makings of a more comfortable home. As they traveled, Warren pointed out landmarks and explained the geography of the area, the best water sources and the places where cattle liked to graze, the territories controlled by different ranchers, and the open range that anyone could use. "Our closest neighbor is about 5 miles to the east," Warren explained. "Jack Murphy and his family. They have been here longer than I have, and Jack has been helpful when I needed advice. His wife, Sarah, is friendly, and they have 3 children who are probably desperate for playmates." Caroline absorbed this information, beginning to build a mental map of her new home, understanding the isolation but also seeing the potential for community. This was not Boston with its crowded streets and rigid social hierarchies. This was something different, harder in some ways but perhaps more honest, more based on what a person could do rather than who their family was. When they arrived back at the ranch, Warren insisted on unloading the supplies himself while Caroline started on supper. But she noticed he brought the fabric and household items to her first, placing them on the table with obvious pleasure. "Make the house however you like it," he said. "Whatever you need, just tell me and I will get it for you. This is your home now, Caroline. I want you to feel that." Over the following days, they fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Warren rose before dawn to tend the animals and work on various ranch projects, and Caroline threw herself into making the house a proper home. She sewed new curtains that brightened the rooms, scrubbed floors until they shone, organized the pantry with an efficiency that impressed Warren. She learned to cook on the cast iron stove, mastering the temperamental heat and producing meals that, while simple, were flavorful and filling. In the evenings, they would sit together at the table or in the armchairs by the fireplace, and Warren would teach Caroline about the ranch, about the territory, about the skills she would need to survive and thrive in this harsh place. He showed her how to handle a rifle, how to watch for signs of weather changes, how to read the land for water and shelter. In turn, Caroline read to him from the books on his shelf, her educated voice bringing stories to life in a way that delighted Warren, who had learned to read late and laboriously. But despite the growing comfort between them, Warren continued to sleep on his bedroll by the fireplace, and Caroline continued to have the bedroom to herself. He never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel that she owed him anything beyond the partnership they had agreed upon. It was both a relief and, increasingly, a frustration. Caroline found herself watching Warren as he worked, noticing the strength in his shoulders, the gentleness in his hands when he handled the animals, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. 3 weeks after their wedding, Caroline woke in the middle of the night to strange sounds outside. She lay still, listening, trying to identify what had disturbed her sleep. scratching perhaps, or digging. Then she heard Warren's quiet footsteps as he rose from his bedroll and moved toward the door, rifle in hand. Caroline slipped out of bed and into the main room, fear tightening her chest. "What is it?" she whispered. "Not sure," Warren replied, his voice low and calm. "Something is bothering the chickens. Probably a coyote or a fox. Stay inside and away from the windows." He slipped out the door before Caroline could protest, and she was left alone in the dark house, her heart pounding. She moved to the window despite his instructions, peering out into the moonlit yard. She could see Warren's silhouette moving toward the chicken coop, rifle at the ready, his posture alert but not panicked. A shot rang out, startlingly loud in the quiet night, and Caroline jumped. Then silence, broken only by the agitated clucking of chickens. Warren appeared again, dragging something that looked like a large dog. A coyote, Caroline realized, her stomach turning at the sight of the dead animal. Warren disposed of the carcass away from the house and returned, pausing at the door to reload the rifle before entering. He found Caroline standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, and his expression softened. "I am sorry that woke you," he said, setting the rifle aside and moving toward her. "Are you all right?" "I was frightened," Caroline admitted. "Not of the coyote, but of something happening to you. I realized that if you were hurt, I would not know what to do, how to help you, how to manage without you." Warren reached out and pulled her into an embrace, his arms strong and warm around her. It was the first time they had been this close since their chaste wedding kiss, and Caroline found herself pressing against him, seeking comfort and reassurance. "I am fine," Warren murmured against her hair. "It was just a coyote. They come around sometimes looking for easy prey, but they are not dangerous to people generally. I am sorry I frightened you." Caroline pulled back enough to look up at him, her hands resting on his chest. In the dim light from the dying fire, his face was all shadows and plains, but his eyes were gentle as they looked down at her. "Warren," she said softly, "why do you still sleep out here by the fire?" He was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on her waist. "Because I wanted to give you time," he said finally. "Time to know me, to trust me, to be certain this is what you want. You have been through so much, Caroline. I did not want you to feel obligated or pressured just because we are married in the eyes of the law." "And if I told you that I am certain," Caroline asked, her voice barely a whisper. "If I told you that I trust you, that I want to be your wife in truth and not just in name?" Warren's hands tightened on her waist, and she saw desire flare in his eyes, quickly tempered by caution. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Because once we cross that line, there is no going back. I need to know that you are choosing this freely, that you are not just trying to fulfill what you think is expected of you." "I am choosing this," Caroline said firmly. "I am choosing you, Warren. You have shown me nothing but kindness and respect. You have made me feel safe and valued. I want to be close to you. I want to share your bed and your life completely. Please, do not make me sleep alone anymore." Warren exhaled shakily and bent to kiss her, and this time it was not the chaste press of lips from their wedding day. This was heat and hunger, tempered by tenderness, a claiming that was also an offering. Caroline responded with equal fervor, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair, her body molding against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "You are certain?" he asked one more time, needing to be absolutely sure. "I have never been more certain of anything," Caroline replied, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Warren swept her up into his arms, carrying her to the bedroom that would now be theirs to share. He laid her on the bed with exquisite care and then paused, his hands shaking slightly as he began to unbutton his shirt. "I have not done this much," he admitted, vulnerability clear in his voice. "I want to do right by you, Caroline. I want to make you happy." Caroline sat up and reached for him, pulling him down beside her. "Then we will learn together," she said simply. "All I need is for you to be gentle and patient, and I know you are both of those things." What followed was tender and awkward and perfect in its imperfection. Warren was indeed gentle and patient and attentive to Caroline's needs and responses. She discovered that desire could be coupled with safety, that intimacy did not have to mean domination or control. Warren treated her body with the same care he showed to everything he valued, as if she were precious and worthy of reverence. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the big bed. The quilt pulled up over them, and Caroline felt something settle in her chest, something that might have been peace or healing or simply the knowledge that she had finally found a place where she belonged. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, the words surprising her even as she spoke them, but feeling entirely true nonetheless. Warren's arms tightened around her, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you too," he murmured. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I read your first letter, and I have been falling deeper every day since." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, and when Warren woke at dawn, it was to find Caroline still tucked against his side, her face peaceful in sleep. He lay still for a long moment, marveling at the turn his life had taken, at the gift he had been given in this brave, beautiful woman. The weeks turned into months, and the ranch began to thrive under their combined efforts. Caroline proved to have a gift for managing the household accounts, stretching every dollar and finding creative ways to supplement their income. She started selling eggs and butter in town, and her vegetable garden flourished under careful tending, even in the harsh climate. Warren expanded the herd, buying young cattle at good prices and raising them to sell for profit. They made friends in the community, attending church services most Sundays and accepting dinner invitations from the Murphys and other neighboring families. Caroline became close with Sarah Murphy, grateful for the friendship of another woman who understood the challenges and rewards of frontier life. Warren joined the local Cattlemen's Association, building relationships with other ranchers and learning from their experiences. In December, 6 months after Caroline's arrival, they received an unexpected visitor. Warren was working on repairing a section of fence when he heard a horse approaching at speed. He straightened, one hand instinctively moving to the revolver he wore at his hip, and watched as a rider appeared, pushing his horse hard. It was Sheriff Cole, and the grim expression on his face set Warren's nerves on edge. Caroline emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her own expression worried. "What is wrong, Sheriff?" Warren asked as Cole pulled his horse to a stop. "Got a telegram for Mrs. Pierce," Cole said, dismounting and pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Came through the territorial office this morning. I thought I should bring it out myself rather than waiting for the regular mail." Caroline took the telegram with trembling hands, her face going pale as she read it. Warren moved to her side, reading over her shoulder. The telegram was from Caroline's younger sister, Margaret. Their father had died of a heart attack 3 weeks earlier. The funeral was long past, but Margaret thought Caroline should know. She also warned that Thomas had been asking about Caroline, claiming to be concerned about her welfare, and that he had hired private detectives to try to locate her. Caroline folded the telegram carefully, her expression unreadable. "My father is dead," she said quietly. "I did not think I would care after everything that happened, but I find that I do." Warren wrapped his arms around her, offering silent comfort. Sheriff Cole shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure whether to leave or stay. "There is more you should know," Cole said finally. "I put out some feelers through law enforcement channels after you two got married, just to make sure there were not any outstanding warrants or legal issues that might cause you trouble. Your former fiancé, this Thomas fellow, he has been making noise about you being kidnapped or coerced. He has got money and influence, and he is using it to cause problems." Caroline stiffened in Warren's arms. "What kind of problems?" "Nothing that will hold up in court," Cole assured her. "You are a married woman now, married of your own free will with witnesses. Even if he finds you, which is not likely given how far you are from Boston, there is nothing he can legally do. But I wanted you to be aware, just in case. Men like that sometimes do not care much about what is legal versus what they want." "If he comes here, he will regret it," Warren said quietly, but there was steel beneath the calm words. Cole nodded approvingly. "I figured you would feel that way. Just make sure you stay on the right side of the law if it comes to that. Defending your property and your wife is one thing. Going looking for trouble is another." After the sheriff left, Caroline sat at the table, staring at the telegram. Warren busied himself making tea, giving her space to process the news, but staying close enough that she knew he was there if she needed him. "I should feel something," Caroline said finally, "about my father dying, but all I can think is that he chose Thomas over me. He chose maintaining appearances over protecting his daughter. And now he is gone, and I never got the chance to make him understand how much that hurt." "You are allowed to feel however you feel," Warren said gently, setting a cup of tea in front of her. "Grief is not simple, especially when the relationship was complicated." Caroline wrapped her hands around the warm cup and looked up at Warren, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am afraid," she admitted. "What if Thomas really does find me? What if he tries to take me back or hurt you or destroy what we have built here?" Warren knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. "Then we will face it together," he said firmly. "You are not alone anymore, Caroline. You have me, and you have our friends here, and you have the law on your side. Thomas has no power over you now, and if he is foolish enough to come here and try to change that, he will discover that things work differently in the territory than they do in Boston." Caroline nodded, drawing strength from Warren's certainty. She leaned down and kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. "I do not know what I did to deserve you," she whispered. "You were brave enough to take a chance," Warren replied. "That is all it took." The threat of Thomas's interference hung over them for the next few months, a shadow on their happiness. But as winter gave way to spring, and no private detectives or angry former fiancés appeared, they began to relax, to believe that perhaps the distance and the marriage certificate would be enough to discourage pursuit. In April, Caroline discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited until she was certain before telling Warren. She chose a quiet evening after supper, when they were sitting together on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "Warren," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "we are going to have a baby." The expression on Warren's face was one of pure joy, wonder, and delight mingling with a hint of fear. "Truly?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Truly," Caroline confirmed, laughing at his reaction. "By my calculations, sometime in late October or early November." Warren pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Caroline asked, even though she could see the answer on his face. "I am happier than I have ever been," Warren assured her. "You have given me everything I never knew I wanted, Caroline. A home, a partner, and now a child. I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you are loved." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite the challenges of frontier life. Martha Matthews and Sarah Murphy were invaluable sources of advice and support, helping Caroline prepare for the baby's arrival. Warren became almost comically protective, insisting that Caroline not lift anything heavy or work too hard, even though she felt perfectly fine and chafed at the restrictions. In July, when Caroline was about 5 months along, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Warren was working in the barn, and Caroline was in the house kneading bread dough. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up, and she felt her blood run cold when she recognized the horse's rider. It was one of Thomas's cousins, a man named Robert who had always been kind to Caroline back in Boston. He dismounted slowly, his hands visible and empty, his expression apologetic. Caroline stepped out onto the porch, one hand instinctively moving to her rounded stomach. "Robert," she said, keeping her voice level despite the fear coursing through her. "What are you doing here?" Robert removed his hat and twisted it in his hands. "I am sorry to come here unannounced, Caroline. I need to speak with you about Thomas." Warren emerged from the barn, moving quickly to Caroline's side, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Who are you?" he demanded. "This is Robert, Thomas's cousin," Caroline explained, her hand finding Warren's free one and gripping it tightly. "Robert, this is my husband, Warren Pierce." Robert's eyes widened slightly as he took in Caroline's obvious pregnancy, but he recovered quickly and nodded respectfully to Warren. "Mr. Pierce, I apologize for the intrusion. I would not be here if the matter was not urgent." "Say what you came to say and then leave," Warren said flatly, his protective instincts in full force. Robert took a deep breath. "Thomas is dead," he said bluntly. "He died 3 weeks ago. I thought you should know, Caroline, so you can stop looking over your shoulder." Caroline felt the world tilt beneath her feet, and Warren's arm came around her waist, supporting her weight. "How?" she managed to ask. "He got into an argument in a tavern, said something insulting to the wrong man. The fellow challenged him to a duel. Thomas accepted, thinking he could back down and save face later. But the other man would not let it go, and Thomas was too proud to apologize. He died of his wound 2 days after the duel." Robert paused, then continued, his voice softening. "I wanted you to know that I never agreed with how he treated you, Caroline. What you did, leaving like that, it took courage. And I wanted to make sure you knew you were free, that you did not have to spend the rest of your life afraid he would find you." Caroline felt tears streaming down her face, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of relief, of release, of a burden she had been carrying finally lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for coming all this way to tell me." Robert nodded and moved toward his horse, then paused. "You look happy," he observed. "You look healthy and cared for. I am glad for you, Caroline. You deserved better than what Thomas offered." After Robert rode away, Caroline turned to Warren and buried her face in his chest, sobbing. Warren held her close, stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. When the storm of tears finally passed, Caroline pulled back and looked up at him. "I am not crying because I am sad he is dead," she said, needing him to understand. "I am crying because I am free, truly free. I do not have to be afraid anymore." "I know," Warren said gently, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "I know, my love, it is over now. You are safe and you are mine, and no one will ever hurt you again." That night, they held each other close, both feeling as if a shadow that had been lurking at the edges of their happiness had finally been banished. The future stretched before them, bright and full of possibility. In late October, just as the weather was beginning to cool, Caroline went into labor. Warren rode hard to fetch Sarah Murphy, who had agreed to help with the delivery, and then spent the next 12 hours pacing the main room while Caroline labored in the bedroom, attended by Sarah and Martha Matthews. When he finally heard the thin wail of a newborn baby, Warren's knees nearly buckled with relief. Sarah emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy, strong boy, and Caroline did wonderfully. She is tired but fine." Warren rushed into the bedroom to find Caroline propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted and radiant at the same time, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he entered, and her smile could have lit the darkest night. "Warren, come meet your son," she said softly. Warren approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny scrunched face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and miniature fists that waved in the air as he fussed. Warren reached out with one finger and touched the impossibly small hand, and the baby's fingers immediately curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Caroline asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Warren looked at his son, at his wife, at the family they had created together, and felt emotion swell in his chest. "James," he said. "James Warren Pierce, if that suits you." "James," Caroline repeated, testing the name. "Yes, I like that. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The first year of James's life flew by in a blur of sleepless nights and small milestones. Caroline proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, and Warren discovered that he was equally suited to fatherhood, delighting in every smile and babble from his son. The ranch continued to prosper, and they were able to hire a young man named Peter to help with the heavy work, freeing up more of Warren's time to spend with his family. When James was 14 months old, Caroline discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less surprising, but no less welcome. Warren joked that they were well on their way to filling the house with children, and Caroline did not contradict him. The loneliness and fear of her old life seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by this full, rich life she had built with Warren. Their daughter was born in early autumn, arriving quickly and with less drama than James's birth. They named her Rose, and she had Caroline's delicate features and Warren's blue eyes. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from changing her diapers to feeding her, his chubby toddler hands surprisingly gentle as he patted her soft head. The years rolled on, bringing both joys and challenges. There were hard winters when money was tight and they had to make do with very little. There were summers when drought threatened the cattle and Caroline's garden struggled despite her best efforts. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of frontier life that tested their strength and resilience. But through it all, Warren and Caroline stood together, their love deepening with each passing year. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned when to offer comfort and when to give space, learned how to fight fair and forgive quickly. They built not just a ranch but a true partnership, each bringing their own strengths to the marriage and supporting the other's weaknesses. When James was 6 and Rose was 4, Caroline gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Samuel and Daniel. The house was suddenly full to bursting with noise and activity, and Warren built an addition to give the children more room. Peter had married and moved on, replaced by a steady series of hired hands who came and went with the seasons. Caroline had long since overcome any shame about her past. She had proven herself to be an integral part of the Lordsburg community, known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. She taught Sunday school at the church, organized quilting circles for the ranch wives, and became a mentor to newly arrived mail-order brides, helping them adjust to frontier life just as Martha Matthews had once helped her. Warren became known as one of the most successful ranchers in southern New Mexico territory, not through any great wealth but through his integrity and hard work. He served on the local school board, helped settle disputes between neighboring ranchers, and was respected by all who knew him. On a warm spring evening in 1895, when they had been married for 17 years, Warren and Caroline sat together on the porch swing he had built for her 10th anniversary. The children were inside doing their evening chores, their voices and laughter drifting through the open windows. The desert stretched before them, painted in the soft colors of approaching sunset. "You ever regret it?" Warren asked, his arm around Caroline's shoulders. "Leaving Boston, coming here, all of it?" Caroline turned to look at him, seeing the threads of gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, the strength and goodness that radiated from him as powerfully now as it had when she first met him. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "Everything I endured before led me here to you, to this life. How could I regret that?" Warren pulled her closer and kissed her temple. "I fell in love with you the moment I saw you step off that train," he admitted. "You looked so afraid but so determined not to show it. You were trying so hard to be brave, and all I wanted to do was take care of you, to show you that you did not have to be afraid anymore." "You did show me that," Caroline said softly. "Every single day, you have shown me what real love looks like. Not control or possession, but partnership and respect and choosing each other, over and over again." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. From inside the house came the sound of James teaching Samuel and Daniel a song, his young voice confident and clear, while Rose's higher voice chimed in on the chorus. "We did well, did we not?" Warren said, gesturing to encompass the ranch, the children, the life they had built together. "We did better than well," Caroline corrected. "We built something beautiful out of nothing but hope and hard work and love, and we are not finished yet." Warren raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what else did you have in mind?" Caroline smiled, that radiant smile that still made Warren's heart skip a beat even after all these years. "I want to see our children grow up and build their own lives. I want to meet our grandchildren someday. I want to grow old with you, Warren Pierce, and look back on a life well lived." "That sounds perfect to me," Warren agreed, tightening his arm around her. As if summoned by their conversation, James came out onto the porch, his younger siblings trailing behind him. At 12 years old, he was already showing signs of the man he would become, tall and strong like his father but with his mother's thoughtful eyes. "Mother, father, we were wondering if we could have a story before bed," James said, his formal tone making Caroline smile. "I think that can be arranged," Caroline said, rising from the swing. "What story would you like to hear?" "The one about how you and father met," Rose piped up. "That is my favorite." Caroline and Warren exchanged glances, sharing a moment of silent communication. They had told the children a simplified version of how they met, leaving out the darker details of Thomas and the bruise and the fear. The children knew only that their mother had been brave enough to travel across the country to marry a man she had never met, and that their father had been kind enough to make her feel welcome and loved from the very first moment. "All right," Caroline agreed, herding the children back inside. "But then straight to bed, all of you." The family settled in the main room, the children arranged on the floor at their parents' feet, looking up with eager faces. Caroline began the story, her voice painting pictures of the journey west, of stepping off the train in Lordsburg, of seeing Warren for the first time. "I was so frightened," Caroline said, her eyes finding Warren's across the room. "I thought he would take one look at me and send me back east." But instead he took my hand. And I said I was glad you were here, Warren continued, picking up the story, because I could see how brave you were, how strong, and I knew that any woman with that much courage was exactly the partner I needed. And then what happened? Samuel asked, even though he had heard this story dozens of times. Then we got married, Caroline said simply, and we built this ranch together and we had you children and we lived happily ever after, Rose finished dreamily, like in a fairy tale. Better than a fairy tale, Warren corrected gently, because this is real and it is ours and we worked for every bit of it. After the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Warren and Caroline returned to the porch, neither ready to end the day just yet. The night was clear, the stars brilliant overhead in a way they never were in cities, each point of light sharp and distinct. "You think they will understand someday?" Caroline asked quietly. "When they are older and we tell them the whole truth about how I came to be here?" "I think they will understand that you did what you had to do to survive," Warren said. "And that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the best outcomes. Look at what came from your decision to leave, Caroline. Not just our marriage, but these 4 amazing children, this ranch, this life. You gave all of that to us by being brave enough to take a chance." Caroline leaned her head on Warren's shoulder, feeling the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she was meant to be. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Warren replied, the words as true now as they had been the first time he spoke them. Always and forever. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and constancy in equal measure. New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, and Warren and Caroline celebrated along with their fellow citizens, proud to be part of a growing nation. Their children grew up and began to make their own paths in the world. James, serious and hardworking like his father, took over more and more of the ranch management as Warren aged, proving himself to be a natural cattleman. He married a local girl named Elizabeth when he was 22, and they built a house on the eastern section of the ranch property, expanding the family holdings. Rose, spirited and intelligent like her mother, shocked everyone by deciding to become a teacher. She attended the territorial normal school and returned to Lordsburg to teach at the same school she had attended as a child. She married at 25 to a banker named Henry, and they settled in town, their house always full of students and friends. Samuel and Daniel, inseparable as twins often are, decided to seek their fortunes further west. They wrote long letters from California, describing the ocean and the gold fields and the opportunities available in a state that seemed to be growing by the day. Eventually, Samuel returned to New Mexico and bought his own ranch north of Lordsburg, while Daniel stayed in California and opened a successful mercantile business. Through it all, Warren and Caroline remained the center of their growing family, the steady point around which everything else revolved. They became grandparents many times over, their house once again filled with the sounds of children's laughter as grandchildren came to visit and hear stories and learn about ranch life. In 1920, when Warren was 68 and Caroline was 64, they celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary with a party that brought together 3 generations of family and friends. The ranch house had been expanded several times over the years, and it easily accommodated the crowd that gathered to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. Sheriff Cole, now long retired but still spry, raised a toast to them. "I remember the day I rode out to your ranch to deliver that telegram," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "I remember thinking that Mrs. Pierce looked like she might blow away in a strong wind, and I wondered if she had what it took to survive out here. I have never been happier to be wrong about someone. Everyone laughed, and Caroline blushed, pleased despite herself. Warren squeezed her hand under the table, and she squeezed back, their communication as wordless and perfect as it had been since those early days. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, James pulled his parents aside. "Elizabeth and I have been talking," he said. "We think it is time for you two to take it easier. Let me and the hands handle more of the day-to-day work. You have earned a rest." Warren bristled at the suggestion, but Caroline laid a calming hand on his arm. "He is right, my love," she said gently. "We have worked hard for so many years. Maybe it is time to enjoy the fruits of that labor." Warren grumbled but eventually agreed, and over the following months, he and Caroline gradually stepped back from the demanding physical work of ranching. They still supervised and advised, but they also had more time to simply enjoy each other's company, to take long walks in the evening, to sit on the porch and watch the sunset, to travel to visit their far-flung children and grandchildren. In the spring of 1925, Caroline fell ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia, and despite the best efforts of the doctor from Lordsburg, her condition worsened. Warren barely left her bedside, holding her hand and talking to her even when she was too weak to respond. The children gathered, summoned by telegram, their faces reflecting the fear that Warren refused to acknowledge. But Caroline rallied, her inherent strength and stubbornness pulling her through the worst of the illness. It took months for her to fully recover, and she emerged from the experience frailer than before, her hair gone completely white, her movements slower and more careful. But her spirit was undiminished, and her love for Warren burned as bright as ever. She joked that she was too stubborn to die, that she had promised Warren they would grow old together, and she intended to keep that promise. They had 7 more good years together, years of quiet contentment and deep companionship. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928 with another large party, this time attended by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house overflowed with family, and Warren and Caroline sat in the place of honor, holding hands and watching the celebration with obvious delight. 50 years, Caroline marveled, looking at Warren with eyes that still held the same love and admiration they had on their wedding day. "Can you believe it has been 50 years? Best 50 years of my life," Warren said firmly. "And if I had it to do over again, I would not change a single thing." "Not even the hard parts," Caroline teased gently. "The drought of '93, the winter we almost lost the entire herd." "Not even those," Warren insisted. "Because we faced them together and we came out stronger on the other side. That is what matters, Caroline. Not that life was always easy, but that we never faced it alone." In early 1932, Warren's health began to decline. He was 80 years old, and a lifetime of hard physical labor had taken its toll on his body. His heart was failing, the doctor said gently, and there was little that could be done. Warren accepted the news with the same quiet courage he had shown throughout his life, his only concern being for Caroline and what would happen to her after he was gone. "The ranch is secure," James assured his father during one of Warren's better days. "Mother will always have a home here, always be cared for. You do not need to worry about her." "I have always worried about her," Warren said with a faint smile. "From the moment I saw her step off that train looking so lost and afraid. Taking care of Caroline has been my greatest privilege and my deepest joy." Caroline, overhearing from the doorway, felt tears stream down her face. She entered the room and shooed James away, wanting private time with her husband. She climbed carefully onto the bed beside Warren, settling into the curve of his arm just as she had done for over 50 years. "You gave me everything. she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me safety and love and a family and a purpose. You saw me at my lowest and you chose me anyway. How can I possibly let you go?" Warren's hand, now thin and spotted with age, came up to cup her cheek. "You do not have to let me go completely," he said gently. "I will always be with you, Caroline. In this house we built together, in our children and grandchildren, in every sunrise over the desert and every star in the night sky. Death cannot touch what we have created together." "It is not enough," Caroline said fiercely. "I want you here with me always." "I know," Warren soothed. "And I wish I could stay. But if this is our time to part, at least for a while, then I need you to know how grateful I am. You made my life complete, Caroline. You made everything worthwhile." Warren passed peacefully in his sleep 3 days later, Caroline at his side, holding his hand as she had held it that first day on the train platform. The entire community turned out for his funeral, testament to the life he had lived and the respect he had earned. He was laid to rest in the Lordsburg cemetery, in a plot with space reserved beside him for Caroline when her time came. Caroline grieved deeply, but not desperately. She had been blessed with 54 years of marriage to a man who had loved her completely and shown her every day what true partnership looked like. That was more than most people ever received, and she was grateful for every moment. She lived for another 12 years after Warren's death, staying active and involved in her children's and grandchildren's lives. She finally passed away peacefully in 1944 at the age of 88, surrounded by family in the ranch house she and Warren had made into a home. She was buried beside Warren, and the headstone reads simply, "Caroline Pierce, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was brave enough to take a chance and wise enough to choose love." At the funeral, James stood before the gathered crowd and told the story one last time, the story of how his parents had met. He told the whole truth this time, including the parts his mother had once been ashamed of, the fear and the bruises and the desperate flight across the country. "My mother taught me that there is no shame in surviving," James said, his voice steady despite his grief. "There is no shame in doing what you must to protect yourself and build a better life. She was one of the bravest people I have ever known, and my father recognized that from the very first moment he saw her. He took her hand with pride and joy, and he never let go, not in 54 years of marriage. They showed all of us what real love looks like," he continued. "Not fairy tale perfection, but daily choice and commitment. They chose each other every single day, through good times and bad, through prosperity and hardship. They built something lasting, something beautiful, and we are all the beneficiaries of that legacy." The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation that Warren and Caroline had laid. The house was preserved as much as possible, becoming a beloved gathering place where children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would come to hear stories about the mail-order bride who stepped off the train ashamed, and the cowboy who took her hand with pride and joy, and how together they built not just a ranch but a love that would echo through the ages. In the end, Caroline's greatest fear had been that she would always be defined by her shame, by the mistakes and misfortunes that had driven her west. But Warren had shown her a different truth. That shame could be transformed into strength, that fear could become courage, and that the worst moments of life could lead to the very best, if only one was brave enough to keep moving forward. Their love story became legend in Lordsburg and the surrounding territory, told and retold through the generations, as an example of what was possible when two people committed fully to each other and to building something together. It was not a story of love at first sight or dramatic passion, but of steady devotion, daily kindness, and the profound beauty of two imperfect people choosing to walk through life side by side. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, family members gathered on the old porch claimed they could feel the presence of Warren and Caroline still watching over the ranch they had built, still holding hands as they had in life, still choosing each other even beyond death. Well, no one who knew their story thought to question it. Some loves were simply too strong to be contained by a single lifetime, too profound to be limited by the boundaries between this world and whatever lay beyond. The mail-order bride who had arrived ashamed and afraid had found not just a husband but a true partner, not just a home but a purpose, not just survival but a love that would endure through generations. And the cowboy who had taken her hand with pride and joy had found exactly what he had been searching for all along. A woman brave enough, strong enough, and loving enough to stand beside him and build something lasting. Together, they had created a legacy of love that would never fade, a testament to the transformative power of choosing kindness over cruelty, acceptance over judgment, and partnership over domination. Their story was one of redemption and second chances, of finding light in darkness and building hope from despair. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of love story the Wild West was made for. Gritty and real, challenging and beautiful and absolutely, undeniably true.